Now, before we start the conversation on investments, how is the Global South looking at not just investing in the traditional markets and areas that were a focus, but also diversifying? Let's just talk about how hot the Caribbean islands have gotten after certain actions by the United States of America. In that scenario, how much, Premier Wheatley, how much has that impacted the British Virgin Islands?
Well, first of all, let me just thank World Government Summit for inviting me here for this important conversation. The United Arab Emirates has shown great leadership, in my view, in coming together at a crucial time where the current world order is under scrutiny and under stress, but it certainly presents opportunities for us as small island developing states to redevelop an order which is more just, more equitable, more sensitive to the needs of small island developing states such as the Virgin Islands. Of course, the geopolitical tensions which exist right now are something that we are keeping a close eye on. It's certainly a challenge. For instance, when we had the brief instability in Venezuela, it caused great travel disruptions. Of course, travel was paralyzed. And of course, the military buildup, which we see very closely in the Virgin Islands, because of course we're very close to the United States Virgin Islands, where you see the military buildup very closely, very close to Puerto Rico. And of course, we want peace and stability in the region, because of course that type of instability can have an impact, of course, on our neighbors, who we have great solidarity with, but also disrupt our economy.
Okay. Prime Minister Mitchell, how is your country looking at, now we do know that the British Virgin Islands is a part or territory of the United Kingdom, but as a state, as a sovereign nation, how did Grenada look at the tensions in the waters? How did it impact business? And how did it impact your decision-making in investments?
Well, thank you for having me, and let me say thank you for those who are still here to join us for this panel. And I want to join with thanking the UAE government for the wonderful hospitality and for the significant leadership in bringing all of us together. We're actually 100 miles away from Venezuela. So that should tell you how close we are to the action. And I think in a general sense, once you had the military build-up, obviously it would have created significant anxiety and unease, I think, for the Caribbean. We've, I think, since the 1980s, tried to, from a Caribbean perspective, have our region declared as a zone of peace. And I think similarly, you know, when you have incidents like the Palestinian issue, the Iranian issue in this region, I think the unease that everyone feels would have been a similar sort of approach, I think, in the Caribbean. So you would have had, for example, closure of airspace, cancellation of flights. We are heavily tourism dependent. And obviously, you can't have investment, you can't have people flying in if there's a risk of political instability or military action. So to some extent, and that obviously depends on perspective, we are relieved that it does appear that for now, the likelihood of any further military action is stayed, and perhaps there is a path for continued dialogue and diplomacy and negotiations between the US and the Venezuelan authorities that we hopefully will redound to the benefit of the region in the context of no instability and peace, and therefore an opportunity for long-term investment in our islands.
Premier Wheatley, moving from aid dependency to strategic investment-driven development models, how is the government, or how is the British Virgin Islands, how are you looking at restructuring, or are you looking at restructuring at all?
Well, certainly we've built a very strong economy over the years, not just reliant on tourism and traditional sectors like agriculture and fisheries. We are a very strong financial center in the Virgin Islands. We have about 370 plus companies registered in the Virgin Islands. You know, these companies hold assets of over $1.4 trillion, facilitates 2.3 million jobs overseas, and in the region of the Middle East, we facilitate maybe about $2 billion of inward investment through our companies into the Middle East. But of course, we always have to ensure that we are staying on the ball, paying attention to what's happening in the geopolitical landscape, how it's becoming somewhat more fractured. We see regional blocs developing a tendency towards protectionism, nationalism, and of course we've been able to thrive over the years because of the free-flowing capital, because we facilitate investment across borders globally. About 60% of our companies come from the Asia-Pacific region, about 20% from Caribbean and Latin America. So we are truly global in our outlook. But we certainly have to ensure and pay attention to what is taking place. And that's why we think these forums are important, because we believe the rest of us, besides the West, have to cooperate more. We have to have more solidarity. We have to have more functional cooperation, and we must also learn from best practice, which takes place around the world. We're extremely impressed with what's happening here in the United Arab Emirates, the way that you've used this investment not just to generate wealth, but a sustainable type of living, making sure that persons have good health care, good education, access to quality homes. And this is something that we would like to replicate in the Virgin Islands and in the wider region. But of course, we want to diversify our markets. We want more business coming from the Middle East, from India, etc. We are going on a big trade mission later this year to India, to ASEAN, and of course, tourism continues to be very strong, but we also want to diversify our markets in tourism. Of course, we rely heavily on the United States of America. Soon we'll be extending our airport runway, and we hope to facilitate long-haul flights that would facilitate persons coming from places like the Middle East and from Asia, etc.
All right, Prime Minister Mitchell, how is Grenada looking at diversifying beyond just the traditional sectors? Are we looking at more financial sectors as well within the country? And again, in a day and age where the Caribbean is seeing a lot of disruption, how are you prioritizing the sectors here?
Sure, thank you. Well, I should point out, I think most of the Caribbean have long gone beyond the aid model of development. To a large extent, we are all middle-income countries. I'll give an example. USAID was canceled, and in my country, there wasn't a single program that was impacted because there's just no USAID to us. So we've sort of long gone beyond that and have taken, in a sense, non-traditional ways of attracting foreign direct investment. So for example, in Grenada, our financial services are not as strong or robust as the BVI, but we have an investment migration program that has, in the last 10 years, contributed significantly to both direct government revenues as well as foreign direct investment that has allowed us to actually weather some pretty significant shocks, both in terms of economic shocks as well as climate shocks. For example, last year, and COVID. So for example, last year we would have had a pretty devastating Category 4 hurricane very early in the hurricane season. That allowed us to withstand that shock, engage in significant rebuilding without having in any way to suspend our debt payments or engage in any sort of calamitous financial restructuring. We were able to weather the COVID-19 shutdown of the economy for almost 2 years and still pay people in the tourism sector who are out of jobs. So, our approach is, I heard a Prime Minister of Montenegro talking about the need for, a Prime Minister essentially to be the chief salesperson of the countries, and to a large extent, that's how we see our roles as well. So it's not just from a policy-making perspective, but how do you champion an environment that encourages foreign direct investment? So we think there are a couple of areas, and the Premier talked about it. Healthcare, for example. We don't see healthcare as a sector where you're just simply trying to provide primary or reactive care to your citizens, but we see it as a specific growth sector. We have a huge offshore medical and veterinary school on our island that has, in a sense, grown enormously over the last decade, that attracts students from all over the world. It's valued at over $1 billion, has significant hedge fund investments. And so we are producing doctors from all over the world, including from Africa, Asia, the Middle East. The students come. It's accredited to the US, so they have an opportunity, both from a nursing, veterinary, and a medical perspective, to be educated in Grenada, live in perhaps paradise, and at the same time get an opportunity to then become global citizens. And we are looking to build a state-of-the-art teaching research hospital that will piggyback on this, that would allow for us to enter the medical tourism market at a high-end level that matches with our tourism. So we take a very, this is just one extra. So traditionally, you'd see education as something a government spends to educate its citizens. We've managed to actually create an education industry that is effectively about 20% of the country's GDP by having that school. And so we think the next stage is obviously actual healthcare. And there's some clear advantages. A lot of the research that is done in Western countries. So you find the ethnic makeup is not necessarily appropriate for Africa or Asia or even the Middle East. The Caribbean is ethnically diverse. So we think it's an opportunity as well for a lot more research to be done and for us to drive innovation in areas like this. So those are some of the non-traditional approaches that we are taking to diversifying our sectors. And I'd add one area, because obviously we've been talking a lot about AI, but I think fintech is still an area that's largely on tap. Blockchain, crypto. My colleague in Bermuda, Bermuda sort of led the way in creating a regulatory framework for cryptocurrency. We just talked about how do we piggyback on the fact that they already have the expertise in regulation to allow Bermuda to be able to become the regulator in Grenada, rather than reinventing the wheel of attempting to do it ourselves, so that we can leapfrog into the space rather than trying to start from scratch. So that's the kind of innovative approach that we are taking to diversifying some of the economic sectors.
Diversifying, okay, but let's just talk about traditional economies within the island nations and states. You just spoke about climate change. How are you building investable pipelines in the blue and green economy, which are traditional, important, and here to stay?
Well, I think it's critical for us to recognize that investment in resilience is critical to our survival and our ability to thrive in a long-term perspective. So whether it's from reef restoration to mangrove restoration to ensuring that we have marine protected areas, those are all carbon sequestering, those are all areas, watershed and water management, waste management, even issues such as having a cyclical economy where we begin to address our waste separation and how we can actually encourage greater composting so that there's less and less waste and in a sense less and less resources dedicating to dealing with waste. Those are all some of the sort of long-term pipeline projects we are looking at in a sense as one investable bank. We've actually created a specific ministry to address the blue economy and to make sure that we see growth in that area. But I think for small islands, our marine space is oftentimes 10 times larger than our land space. So I think repivoting our view of ourselves is critical, and in that sense, traditionally, our education system has largely ignored the fact that we are essentially a marine-based state. I call ourselves big ocean states. And so one of the things we are addressing from an investment point of view is making sure that our education system actually recognizes that it's more important for young people to be educated on the fact that you are in fact a marine state rather than a land-based state. And to that extent, we intend to create a marine school, create a center of excellence that will actually allow us to be able to drive more investment in the long run and greater jobs for young people in the marine sector. So whether it's from just traditional mariners, as an example, to a large extent we are importing labor to support those industries, and we recognize that therefore we are missing the opportunity to give our own citizens the option of working in those sectors, and therefore making sure that we create the investment space by having that marine school, which we believe also has the same sort of opportunities for commercial scale as the medical and veterinary schools, as some of the areas we're pursuing.
Premier Wheatley?
Yeah, we're similar to Grenada in many respects. The blue economy is extremely important to us. We have a large charter boat sector similar to Grenada, and of course that has been able to sustain us very well. But as Prime Minister Mitchell stated, disaster resilience is very important to us. The Virgin Islands was struck by 2 devastating Category 5 hurricanes in 2017. Disrupted our marine sector, our tourism sector, destroyed homes, government buildings, etc. So investing in disaster and risk mitigation tools, just like Grenada did when they invested in a parametric insurance, so that when we are visited on by these natural disasters, that we can have a means of being able to rebuild without taking these big loans. The Virgin Islands had to get some big loans to recover from the hurricanes, and we're still doing so. So we don't just want investment, we want to invest in sustainability and also disaster risk reduction. Extremely important for us in the Virgin Islands as we seek to continue to build our economy and build our people.
Okay, in these very fragile times, not just when it comes to economies, businesses, a disrupted world in the economic sector, financial sector, but also in terms of climate change. These are two states and countries, so to say, who are looking to build. So thank you so much for this lovely conversation on the vulnerabilities as also forward-looking futuristic plans. Thank you.
Thank you so much.